Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our series for THE Student Funding Week. I'm Jamie with THE Student, and I'm joined today by Daryl Fong, Chief Operating Officer at AACC Global. And today we're going to talk about funding your degree in Australia. We hope that today's session will give you some sound advice on how to understand and prepare for the cost of studying in Australia. And we're going to talk a little bit too about why the investment is so worthwhile. We've been conducting some informal polling via Instagram this week to learn a little bit more about what students want to know around funding. And 88% of people who responded to our poll said that finding information about funding for international students is hard. And 86% said that they feel put off from applying to certain countries if funding information isn't clear. So that's why we're here today. We hope that the series of webinars this week, along with all of the resources on our site, will help you learn a little bit more about where to look for funding options, make you more aware of what is available for you, and also just to help you feel a little bit at ease about the big investment that you'll be making in your education. We will, of course, be happy to take your questions, so please do submit them using the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. I should also, though, caveat by saying that it's unlikely that Daryl and I will be able to answer questions specific to your own circumstances. Unfortunately, a lot of eligibility around forms of funding can be based on so many different things: where you're from, where you want to study, what you want to study. So we'll certainly do our best, but today's session is really about, providing you some guidance and some insight on how to find funding options and how to navigate the world of funding for international students. Before we jump into the Q&A, Daryl, I thought I would just give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about AACC.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Daryl Fong. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of AACC Global. AACC Global is an international organization recruiting students from all around the world. So we have partners with many of the universities in Australia. In fact, most of the universities in Australia are our partners. And we have offices in South Asia, Southeast Asia as well. So we cover quite a footprint in terms of student numbers. I've been in the education line for 30 over years, started off as a counselor. So I really worked my way onto the top and counsel, I guess, thousands of students, who chose to study in Australia. So I'm pretty familiar with this topic, and I'd like to share as we go along today's session, some of I would call them strategies, Jamie, or ideas, or how do we actually plan on and look at, because probably you haven't done this before, and maybe I can shed some light on that.
Excellent, thank you, and thanks for being here today. I think I'd like to start with just kind of talking about the value of the investment in a student's education, because we know that it's a big investment for students and their families to study abroad, no matter where they're interested in studying. And so I think we should kind of just start, before we talk about funding and costs and all of those things, talking about why is international study such a valuable experience, and what advice would you give to students who are at the early stages of thinking about studying abroad and maybe just deterred by the cost before they even begin researching and deciding where to apply?
I think that's a very good question to start with. I guess, going overseas is probably to study, I think is probably once in a lifetime thing. And I think you can go to a country for holidays, but it's nothing like going there to study, because I think you learn a lot of things about yourself, about people, and so on. For me, it was also a very interesting journey. I mean, I went to Australia to study many years ago, and my family wouldn't be able to afford an international education. But ever since I got this book about the rivers of Australia, I just tell myself, this is where I need to be. This is where I need to go and discover myself and find out more about it. So obviously, I need to do a lot of planning, asking a lot of questions with people that I know of, because I felt that, I couldn't make friends, like even now, I'm sure you can make friends online and so on. But I think something cannot be taught, it has to be caught. You have to go there and, feel it out and so on. And I guess, what better way to do that is to go to a new country to learn and relearn about yourself and, how things are and so on. I think that's probably a very important thing. And for my family, had I not actually take up this challenge of going abroad, I think my family will never be the same, because I know in my my parents' generation, nobody has actually studied overseas. It's unthinkable, you know. But I think it's changed everything in our lives. My siblings have all be able to go for an international education as a result of me supporting them, and also obviously our niece and nephews and so on. So I think it is something that we know the value of it, all right, the intangible value. But Jamie, as you said, the cost is obviously something that we need to you know, be aware of as well. So I think today I'd like to share with you, you know, some of my experiences counseling student and where to look for this information and how we actually plan ourselves about that.
Yeah, and it's such a good point too, isn't it? That, you know, studying abroad is of course about the degree that you'll receive and the university that you'll attend, but it's also about all of the experiences that you will soak up from being immersed in another culture, from being surrounded by students who are from different parts of the world and different backgrounds. So there's so much to be gained from the experience. It really is invaluable. And I think it's really good that, you know, students are thinking about the cost and that they're planning for it, but I never want students to feel deterred from even, you know, researching or choosing a university because they're afraid of the cost, because as we're going to talk about today, there are so many ways to help support you and provide additional funding so that it is, you know, a realistic possibility. So with that, I think let's talk a little bit about the cost in a bit more detail. I think it can be difficult sometimes for students to understand what is the total investment that I'm going to be making in my education. Typically, the tuition and fees that the university is going to charge are very, very clear, but there are so many other costs that can add up for students. Big things like accommodation, smaller things like textbooks and things like that. So what advice do you give to students about estimating the total cost of their degree and sort of understanding what is this whole investment going to look like, and what are all of those other bits and pieces that we need to consider as we're planning for the cost of an education abroad?
Yeah. So primarily, I think the big two fixed costs would be definitely the tuition fees and the cost of living. So in the case of Australia, all right, most of the tuition fees for classroom-based programs are about 30,000 a year. For lab-based programs, about 40,000. Now, the Australian government has actually given a figure actually in terms of cost of living, and that's given by the Department of Borders and Immigration and Borders and so on. So that's come up to be 21,000 per year. So you need to have that amount if they are asking you about demonstration of funds and so on. So those are the two big blocks of funds that you need. The other things, as Jamie mentioned, textbooks, maybe airfares, visa processing fees, which is about $500 and so on. And obviously some application fee that some institutions charge. But those are quite small amount compared to these two fees. For me, I think you really need a strategy, you know, to work this through. So what I would usually do or advise students, first of all, is to look at the course you want to study, all right? And then look at the scholarships, which is probably the things that that can help you in terms of the tuition fees funding. You see, in Australia, the fees, there's a lot of scholarships out there, and you need to know where to find them. And at AACC Global, we actually compile all this information onto, depending which country you're coming from. See, for example, I'm a student, I want to study engineering. So I'll look for all the universities that are offering engineering scholarships that you can find there. Then what about other form of scholarships? That's by subject and merit as well. Then there is the other type, which is by nationality. Say, for example, Macquarie, if you're Southeast Asian students, $10,000 is yours, all right? So that's for nationality group. But for me, I think it's very important that we look at scholarship funding, which means that, for example, Deakin, they have a 100% tuition fees for South Asians doing engineering program. Now, that's the kind of information that you look out for if you are looking at saving costs in that way. And I think at Australian national universities, they also have course fees, which are subject specific and nationality specific, and they lump it together, and it's very attractive. It could be up to like 25%, and again, in the case of engineering, can be up to 25% off, and in commerce as well, it's up to 50% off. I think these are all because of the pandemic. I think institutions are actually, you know, trying to help students. The other reason why they gave this scholarship in such generous amount is also because they want to encourage diversity. So they want more students to study. So if you look at some universities like Torrance universities, if you're a woman and you're choosing to study engineering, straight away you get 25% off. So there's a lot of those funding that you need to look at. Now, the other thing you also need to look at is stacking of scholarship. Stacking meaning, like, for example, you apply, let's say for University of South Australia, you apply early, there's an early bird discount of 25%. So they want you to make a commitment. And then there is a merit scholarship, which is another 25%. So when you add it up, it's quite a lot from what your original budget is going to look like. Now, Jamie, if you look even further down the line, then you could look at the university's fees. Because some of the universities are, right, for example, let's say like Monash, the fees are quite hefty, like 45,000. So if they give you a 50% discount, so you're only looking at maybe like 20 over plus thousand. But if you are not too brand conscious, or you don't mind going to a regional place like Perth, Darwin, Tasmania, Adelaide, the fees are generally lower. So that's probably around $20,000 to $30,000, and they are offering you even 25% off. So, and that actually helps you in terms of your total cost. And to sweeten the deal is the cost of living. As I mentioned earlier on, that's $21,000. So if you go to a regional city, you can actually save a lot, because your rental is the killer. Because the rental costs in some of the regional cities are much more affordable. So for example, instead of $21,000, you probably spend $18,000 a year just on your cost of living. And better still, if your intention of going to Australia is not only to study, but probably live there, going to these regional cities also give you additional points when you're considering to submit a permanent residency application. So for me, I tell the student, don't look at this year, but look 3 years, 5 years down the track, and then you look at the cost of your investment, how it all actually adds up and how it shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's key to all of the information that you've just given us is that it's really important to start thinking about funding early on in the process. Like, it should be part of the research that a student is doing about the universities and the courses that they want to study. I'm sure you've seen this, and I've seen it quite often, that a student decides on the universities that they want to apply to or that they're interested in without doing any research about funding or scholarships. And unfortunately, that can lead to disappointment when they realize, oh, actually the fees here are quite high and I won't be eligible for, a big enough scholarship to make this realistic. So I think one of the key takeaways from that is that there is a lot of money available to international students, but you really need to be on top of sort of understanding what's available and doing that research and the legwork to find out what you're eligible for.
Yeah, I think that's where the counselors can come and help you, because they have this matrix of information by courses, by nationality, by merits, and so on. And then depending when you want to do your studies, let's say, because Australia, there's another advantage, because some of the universities actually runs on a tri-semester basis. So which means like a 3 years degree, you can finish in 2 years. And some of the scholarships are by units. So instead of giving you one lump sum, they charge every subject the saving of $500. So if you're doing on the tri-semester, you can actually save quite a fair bit of amount of money. So for example, like Griffith University, their scholarship is based on the units that you do, and they're cutting off $500 off every unit that you choose. So there's a lot of saving for you in the subjects that you choose, especially during the pandemic, because a lot of students are now studying online because the borders are still not open. Now, don't forget, because you're only paying the tuition fees and you don't have to pay that 21,000, which is the cost of living. So you're starting your degree early, all right? So Jamie, as I said, life is what you make out of it, whatever the situation, you got to actually strategize and look at what, you can afford and what's the circumstances that, persuade you to make certain decisions. And, and the best is actually to talk to the counselors to get some direction, some advice, and so on. And the universities, I think, all are trying to, get your eyeball, attention, and so on. And I know the earlier remark that you make, that it's actually very difficult to find this information because, you don't have access to all this information. University don't really, make it a point to showcase it. But over at AACC Global, we have a few guys who do nothing but collecting scholarships. So it's all scholarships. So every day we will have, like University of Western Australia, $45,000 scholarship. That's a lot of money, So like for undergraduate, and 30,000 for postgraduate for the Global Leadership Excellence Scholarship, and so on. So there's all this information that we really actually send it to the students, and so that they are aware of it. But again, the university or the course, are also things that, the students need to consider, and also the place where they choose to study are also considerations. So we try to actually so-called locate all the key points that they're looking at, and then look at what are the scholarships available for each particular intake.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked primarily about scholarships that are available directly from universities. There are also, of course, some sources of funding that would come from outside sources, third parties, not the student and their family and not the university that they're attending. Can you speak a little bit about some examples of what some of those things might be, although they are very specific to, each student and their circumstances, and maybe some advice on where students could look to find some of those other opportunities?
Yeah, there are quite a lot actually. The banks, they usually offer it, like Maybank in Malaysia, they're offering scholarship for students who are choosing to study overseas. And then in the case of Indonesia as well, the government also offers scholarships, but they're for very specific courses, like things like engineering or science and things like that. The other places will be the government, the various ministries offering scholarships. But then these scholarships, they have a bond tied to it. So you have to work for a certain period of years after you take up these scholarships. So you're going to be so-called a civil servant. But the banks one, I think theirs is they provide a so-called like a income or a job for you if you take up these scholarships. Now, the Australian government also have got some of the scholarships as well, especially for research and postgraduate students. There's the Endeavour Scholarship, which is quite widely publicized and so on. So these are some of the places where you can actually choose to consider. For me, I would also approach the universities themselves directly. Say, for example, I'm working at a university, and I can also ask the universities to actually subsidize my tuition fees if I'm choosing to do a master's and so on, so that, I would contribute back to the universities to upgrade myself and so on. So there are a lot of these sort of options, I guess, that we can consider. I think once you talk to the counselors, they will help you to explore all these options and so on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned that's important for students to remember is that there may be opportunities for funding that come from your home country. So it's not all about looking at the country that you're going to, but also make sure you understand locally, are there organizations, your local government, banks, et cetera, in your home country that might be providing funding to students who want to study abroad, with the hope, obviously, that then those students return to their home country and invest in their local communities, their time and talents. There's an important question from the audience that I want to address, which is, can some of those third-party scholarships that we've just talked about stack with scholarships given by the institution? I would say typically the answer is yes, but Daryl, of course, you would know better.
It is possible. You can stack those scholarships up. So in the case, like say, for example, like Singapore, the Ministry of Health, Allied Health gives actually scholarship for those who want to study all the allied health sciences courses like physiotherapy and so on. But then if you are from a polytechnic, and the universities actually give a scholarship for polytechnic students. So on top of that, you get, savings from both parties as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Daryl, what would you say, how early should students be looking at, particularly thinking about Australia and the timeline for applications and things like that in Australia? What would be sort of a rough outline of a timeline that a student should follow in terms of when they should begin their process, when they should start, thinking about applications and scholarships and funding and all of those things, and how that progresses for them? Because I suspect there are a handful of students in our audience who are early in the process and are maybe just feeling a bit overwhelmed by the whole thing.
Yes, I think the earlier the better. I always say that because usually the universities typically will take maybe 2 to 3 weeks to revert back to you with your letter of offer. And then you have to actually work your way through. But I think the more important thing is to know when the university starts. So there are 2 main intakes, which is March and July. But then now with the pandemic, I think last year, they introduced a trimester intake, which is October. So I guess it's also very helpful because depending on the exams results released in different countries, it actually gives them another option to consider, just in case they miss the March intake, there's still the July one and the October one. So I would say give yourself at least like 3 months time. But a lot of universities are quite, admission office are quite responsive. I think they can react to an application, especially if it is a straightforward one, meaning that your exams results are the, not an uncommon one, but a rather standard one. I think they can do the assessment pretty properly.
Great. Unsurprisingly, perhaps we've got a few questions from the audience around COVID and international students being able to come to Australia. I understand you may not be able to give concrete answers about this, but there is obviously a lot of concern from international students who are interested in studying in Australia and don't know when they'll be able to actually get to campus. So what advice or update or information can you provide to students who are concerned around that particular issue?
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't any definitive news about that. Though I think the last couple of days, they're talking about Victorian state, going to have a trial by May, but that needs to pass through the federal government approval before it can take place. So for us, I think my advice for students, because I think initially, maybe if you asked me, Jamie, this question a year ago, I would say that either you can wait or you cannot wait. Right? So if you cannot wait, then don't waste time and then, do the online now and then onshore soon. But if you really want the onshore experience, all right, I think it's very difficult for them to actually give you an answer now, here and now. So I think for most students, our advice is that why don't you try the online first, all right? If you really like it, then, it might help you to defray some costs and also save you some time, because time is also money, isn't it? So you don't want to waste, time, just, lugging around and so on. And I think quite a lot of universities are actually offering quite good support, hardship support. So for example, universities like Griffith University, Flinders University. So should you decide to come onshore later on, they're giving you stipend fees for you to adjust to the cost of living. And some universities like, I can't remember which one, I think James Cook universities, they're giving you 50% off accommodation when you arrive onshore. So you see, they're very genuine about you to actually try the online now and then, come on board, and we'll still support you, along your study journey. So that's the advice I would give to students, because in the even in cases like I think in some other parts of the world, like US and so on, even the students can go onshore there, but they're still learning online at home. It's still blended learning. So why not, take up this option? Because I think universities have invested quite a fair bit of money into online delivery and so on. And I think Australia is going to show up by introducing what they call overseas center of learning. So if you have a lousy Wi-Fi connection at home and your laptop is not working all the time, I think they're going to come up with some resources where you can go to actually have your lessons, together with other people that you can study together with them. So I think they are very genuine about, identifying all the solutions that they can to actually help you to make that transition.
Yeah, and I think universities have become so much savvier in the virtual learning space over the past 12 months. I mean, I think there was obviously a big scramble this time last year to just figure out how do we offer something online. And now I think they've gotten, really good at it. It's really impressive to see what the universities are able to offer online. And, we know that lots of students are having a really good experience with virtual learning. And I think, it's obviously not ideal for most students, but as you said, it is an opportunity to save a little bit of money. You're not paying for your cost of living, to get some of your degree completed, to not lose the time. And then hopefully to be able to join students on campus in the relatively near future when it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
Just
so
taking. Sorry, go ahead.
Just very quickly. Some of the courses that you might think that it's not possible, like nursing, because it's such a lab-based program, like universities like Flinders, they've also now converted their nursing program to an online delivery mode. So they push, and also engineering, and a lot of universities are doing that. They're pushing all the theoretical units onto online and then save the practical towards the end. So universities are very nimble in that sense to make sure that you don't lose out in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear. I'm just taking a look through the questions that have come in, and there are quite a few questions that are really specific to students' circumstances, that they've been offered a place at X university and they've got questions about how to fund it and things like that. So I think the best advice for students who are in that position are to speak to the university directly, but also to perhaps seek the resources of an AACC Global or similar to be able to provide some expert advice on how to fund their degree and move forward in the process. We have very, very quickly gone through 25 minutes of our 30-minute session. Daryl, is there anything else that you'd like to share with students, particularly around funding and seeking options for funding? Any other strategies or advice that you think would be useful for them as they head off into the world of funding a degree abroad?
I think the most important thing is to actually read up and learn, discuss your needs and your situation with the counselors. I think that's the first thing that I would advise them to do, because that's the only way you can find out, because the information on scholarships are not necessarily very big and bold on the university's profile. So I think that's the first thing you need to do. And then obviously discuss with your parents, what options have you got. But I think some students are also exploring, transnational education as an option, instead of going to, say, for example, James Cook or Monash. They will probably do it in Monash, Malaysia, or, Murdoch, Dubai, and things like that. So those are also possible options for you to consider to save some costs. And then, these university degrees are very transportable. They can actually help you to go to different campuses, and it might be something that you might enjoy the experience of studying different cities and so on. So that's something that I would advise the students to consider. Then obviously discuss, and it's very hard for students to decide, because unless you have offers sitting in front of you, because once you have, let's say, 3 or 4 universities offers, then you can make a decision. Okay, then what are the cost savings I have for this? And then you discuss with your parents or whoever starts sponsoring you, and then make some adjustment on that. And I think a lot of universities also have got some last minute promotion on courses, like, let's say, for example, quite a large number of universities, I think towards the run up for the October intake, they actually decide to give up more scholarships and helping students. In fact, we always get a list of students, that from the universities asking us, do they need any support or help and things like that. So we do that all the time. We share with these students, and then hopefully that will help them, to narrow the gap of the investment.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Daryl, thank you so much for your expertise and for all of the valuable tips you've provided for students. I hope that for the students in the audience, it gives them some sense of understanding of what's available out there. And actually, it sounds like universities in Australia are incredibly generous when it comes to working with international students. So it's a great place for students to consider. And there are so many options for them to get some support in funding their degree. For those who are in the audience who are considering other study destinations or who are still thinking about where you might want to study, we're doing a session shortly about funding your degree in the UK. That's going to be in about a half an hour. And on Thursday, we'll tackle the US and Canada. As part of our Funding Week programming, we also have sessions tomorrow about money saving tips directly from students and learning the basics of creating and sticking to a budget. So we hope that you'll join us for more of the THE Student Funding Week programming. And of course, you can find tons of additional resources and information on our site, timeshighereducation.com/student. Daryl, thank you so much, and we will see you next time for a THE student event.
Thank you, JB, for having me here. And to all of you out there, all the best. And I hope, don't let the pandemic get you down. All right. Stay positive, stay firm, right? Go and conquer your dreams. And, I think you can do it. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.